Well, hello, everybody. My name is Jessica Micklon, and I'm a member of Eastern Writers Guild. Before we begin, can you take a moment to silence all cell phones that could ring during the event? And a few quick announcements as well. We have a few upcoming events for the Writers Guild. We have a November 16th coffee house at 7:30, and the submissions for the Eastern Exposure are coming up quickly, so check out the website for more information. There are also books in the back, which you can have signed later if you would like, or if you brought a book, you could have that signed as well. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the Board of the Writers Guild, President Chris, Vice President Amanda, Secretary Christina, and Treasurer Amanda, as well as the members of the Writer Guild who have shown their support, as well as our club advisor, Dr. Donahue. Thank you for Dr. Taracchio and all of the English department faculty who helped to make this happen tonight, as well as BAM for providing the budgeting for this event. And thank you to all of you who are in attendance tonight. Maria Mazziotti Gillan grew up in Paterson, New Jersey, and graduated from Seton Hall University and New York University, earning a master's in literature. She's published 21 books, and the most recent of which is a poetry collection called What Blooms in Winter, which has received rave reviews. One critic writes, "She's an exemplar of a poet consciously living. From this comes her creating an awareness of each moment of the past and how it impacts the present. I'll read this book if I ever forget the purpose of poetry, if I ever start believing it's only about the adornment of language. This is the stuff that made humankind want to speak, to write." Her other publications include Things My Mother Told Me, What We Pass On, and All That Lies Between Us, which earned her the 2008 American Book Award. Maria is also the recipient of the AWP's 2014 George Garrett Award for Outstanding Community Service in Literature. The president of the AWP describes Maria as a tireless fighter for writers and writing, a champion of social justice, and an exceptionally generous spirit. Maria's fight for writers and her generous spirit is clear in all that she touches, and she does not stop at writing. Maria is the founder and executive director of the Poetry Center in Paterson, New Jersey, and the editor of the Paterson Literary Review. She is also the director of the Creative Writing Program and the professor of poetry at Binghamton University, SUNY. On top of her acclaimed poetry and significant contributions to the arts, Maria is an inspiration to aspiring writers, teaching courage through poetry, both in the classroom and in her work. She encourages creativity within the significance of the everyday, offers the assurance that every voice is worthy of being heard, and arms us with the skills to use our voices. As someone who is new to writing and poetry, I found deep inspiration in her book, Writing Poetry to Save Your Life, How to Find the Courage to Tell Your Stories, particularly one passage that I feel encompasses her encouraging spirit and unafraid voice. It reads, "I believe that you can transform your life by telling your own story. You just need the courage to begin. Believe that you have a story worth telling. Seize your power." No matter the topic, Maria eloquently brings to life the moments that shape our humanity. Maria has described poetry as a bridge between us as human beings, giving us the courage to say the unsayable. There's a graceful subtlety in her observations of the shared human experience, whether it's a man sitting alone waiting on a friend at IHOP, or as in one of my personal favorite poems, I'm Thinking of the Dress, when Maria illustrates the moments that define our memories of adolescence. She writes, "We sat on a bench and he kissed me, and nothing happened, no spark at all. I think now, poor Jimmy, trying so hard to make people think he was straight, like me sitting on that stone bench in my beautiful blue dress, trying to make people believe I could get a handsome date." In reading her poems and in utilizing several of the hundreds of writing prompts Maria provides in Writing Poetry to Save Your Life, I have learned that it does not always have to be our earth-shattering moments that people will be interested in hearing about. A particularly touching passage in Writing Poetry to Save Your Life reads, "Don't let critics make you doubt yourself. You have the story to tell, and you have a right to tell them. Don't believe them when they say, or when they tell you that you don't. I say, I want to hear your story. Tell me again and again." Without further ado, please welcome Maria Mazziotti Gillan.
I'm going to try not to lose my voice in the middle of this meeting, okay? This nice young lady went back and got me some cough drops, so I'm going to take one first before I start speaking. It's a terrible feeling, I must say, to have laryngitis. I said to my brother, I could lose my legs which I'm sort of losing my legs. But I can't lose my voice because that's what I do. Talk, talk, talk. So I need to be able to go places and talk. And he said, well, you really should stop talking. You'll get over the laryngitis faster. I said, yeah, maybe, but it wouldn't be half as much fun. Okay, I'm going to start by reading a poem about my father. And it's an important poem for me because I was so ashamed of my father and of my mother, actually, because they didn't speak English, because they were working class, because I wanted so desperately to be American, even though one look in the mirror would have told me I wasn't going to succeed at that, but I was convinced that that's what I wanted to do. And I have to say that there were so many times when and I think we all do this, I betrayed somebody I loved. And this was a betrayal of my father, which I could not write about until I was about 50 years old. And it happened when I was 17. There's something about writing something down that helps you to put it down, that helps you to be able to move, to be able to go on. I just, every time I confronted what happened, I felt so ashamed of it that I said, I'll think about this tomorrow. I'll write about this tomorrow. So I had to be 50 before I had the courage to write this poem. We called you Daddy when we talked to each other in the street, pulling on our American faces, shaping our lives in Patterson slang. Inside our house, we spoke a Southern Italian dialect mixed with English, and we called you Papa. But outside again, you became Daddy, and we spoke of you to our friends as my father. Imagine we were speaking of that father knows best TV character in his dark business suit, carrying his briefcase into his house, retreating to his panel den, his big living room and dining room, his fully aproned wife who greeted him at the door with a kiss. Such space and silence in that house. We lived in one big room, living room, dining room, kitchen, bedroom, all in one, dominated by the great oak dining table around which we sat, talking and laughing, listening to your stories, your political arguments with your friends. Papa, how you glowed in company light, happy when the other immigrants came to you for help with their taxes or legal papers. It was only outside that glowing circle that I denied you, denied your long hours as night watchman at Royal Machine Shop. One night, riding home from a date, my middle-class American boyfriend kissed me at the light. I looked up and met your eyes as you stood at the corner near Royal Machine. It was nearly midnight, January, cold and windy. You were waiting for the bus, the street light illuminating your face. I pretended I did not see you, let my boyfriend pull away, leaving you on the empty corner, waiting for the bus to take you home. You never mentioned it, never said you knew how often I lied about what you did for a living, or that I was ashamed to have my boyfriend see you, find out about your second shift work, your broken English. Today, remembering that moment, still illuminated in my mind by the street lamp's gray light, I think of my own son and the distance between us, greater than miles. Papa, silk worker, janitor, night watchman, immigrant Italian. I honor the years you spent in menial work, slipping down the ladder as your body failed you while your mind so quick and sharp longed to escape. Honor the times you got out of bed after sleeping only an hour to take me to school or pick me up. The warm bakery rolls you bought for me on the way home from the night shift, the letters you wrote to the editors of local newspapers. Papa, silk worker, janitor, night watchman, immigrant Italian, better than any father knows best father, bland as white rice. With your wine press in the cellar, with the newspapers you collect out of garbage piles to put into money you bank for us, with your mouse traps, with your cracked and calloused hands, with your yellow teeth. Papa dragging your dead leg through the factories of Patterson. I am outside the house now, shouting your name. I have to say, it took me a long time to be outside shouting his name, because I was just horrendously ashamed of him and of myself. In a way, my daughter and I did 4 anthologies, 3 for Penguin Putnam and 1 for Rutgers University Press. And one of the things we found out when we were doing Unsettling America, the first of the anthologies, is how alike we all are under our skin. How many people were, as they were growing up, were embarrassed by their parents. And the interesting thing for me is that basically, when my son was growing up, I thought because we were professors and we had briefcases and we lived in what I thought of as a nice house. I mean, it wasn't an expensive house, but it was a much nicer house. It wasn't a cold water flat like the one I grew up in, that's for sure. So I thought I had arrived. And then my son, I came to take him to Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts, I guess it was. And he hunched down in the car. He saw me. I came in and I had gotten an afro. This is 1972. And I had gotten an afro. Now, I didn't need an afro. My hair is really kinky. It sticks out all over the place. It has to be straightened or it won't stay. And so what I thought I was doing was like I had stuck my finger in a light socket, because my hair went insane when they tried to do with a permanent. They tried to give me an afro with a permanent. I already had an afro. All I had to do was wash my hair and let it stay, and I had an afro. No, I was going to go one better than that. What I did was I looked freakish. Okay, so my son goes, don't tell anyone you're my mother. And I thought, we get back everything we do to our parents. Every single thing comes back to haunt us. When he said that, it was like time slammed backwards. And I thought, oh my God, all the times I said horrible things to my parents when I was his age and younger and older. And here he is saying to me, I don't want anybody to know that you're my mother. You're a freak. That's really what he was saying. Anyway, now he still feels the same way, I think. And I'm going to read a poem to him or about him. And I would say that he's an arch conservative and I'm an arch liberal. I'm like crazy about the election. I try to, are you voting? Are you voting? I grab people. Are you voting? Are you voting? And then they run away. I see them run, going, get away from her fast. She's crazy. Anyway, this is called What I Can't Face About Someone I Love. That my son loves me, but would prefer not to see me too much. Every Sunday night, when I call him in North Carolina, where he lives with his wife and 2 children, I can hear the heaviness in his voice. His hello tempered with impatience, our conversation stiff and stilted. They always think I could talk to a stone. Strangers in buses and trains tell me their life histories. Acquaintances tell me about their affairs and shattered marriages, show me the secret undersides of their lives. My graduate students vie for my attention. They want to sit next to me and carry my bags and fetch my lunch. But my son can't wait to get off the phone with me. I ask him how the kids are or specific questions about school. Ask about his wife, his job. He answers with 1 or 2 words. They're fine or okay or the same. My son is a lawyer. He was always brilliant with language, at least written language, and he can read a 300-page book in an hour and remember every detail. But with me, he turns mute as a stump. If I ask for help with some legal problem, he will give it. But I do not hear in his voice the lilt I hear in my daughter's voice when I call her. Instead, I hear reluctance, as though his attention were focused on some truly fascinating person, and he can't wait to get off the phone. I tell stories that I hope will amuse him, but finally, after struggling and finding no response, I can't wait to hang up. Well, I say, well, John, have a good week. Give everyone a hug for me. I know my son has divorced me. somewhere deep inside himself, in a place he doesn't look at. I am too much for him. Too loud, too dramatic, too frantic, too emotional. I laugh too much. I wear him out in a minute and a half. If he never saw me again, he wouldn't miss me. And this is what I can't face about someone I love. It's hard. It's hard to have that kind of realization about your own child. I sort of remember holding them in your arms and reading books to them, and the way their heads felt and how heavy their heads were on your chest, and all of a sudden the kid's going, you know what that means? I'm sorry. Honestly, I hope you don't know what that means. Forgive me. Anyway, I'm gonna read a couple of poems from some other books, and then I want to read a few poems from my new book. And I want to read a poem called The Little General. My brother called our mother the Little General when we were teenagers, my brother driving the car, my mother sitting next to him, her head a small dark knob barely reaching the top of the seat. My bossy mother who told us how to live our lives. My mother who was always moving. When I remember her, I see her almost as a blur, like that cartoon of the Roadrunner, my mother who washed all the dishes as soon as the last bite of food vanished from the plate. My mother who held my doctor brother's foot until he fell asleep when he was still a boy. My mother who sat at the kitchen table with us, always ready to hear the stories of our lives, ready to tell the story of hers. My mother who told me everything that was wrong with me, so I still hear her voice, though she said she told me for my own good. My mother who loved the feel of the earth on her hands, who smelled of flour and spices, who baked thousands of loaves of bread, cooked innumerable fragrant meals for her children and grandchildren in her basement kitchen. My mother who taught me how to laugh. My mother who could not read or write, and though she wanted to go to school, my father wouldn't let her. Women don't need to go to school, he said. My mother, who did not know how much money my father had in the bank and never wrote a check. My mother, who wanted to learn how to do everything. My mother, who could quote poems she memorized in 3rd grade in Italy before she had to leave school. My mother, who drew an imaginary line around us to keep us close. The front stoop, our boundary. The family, our country. Her little sturdy body, better than any magic charm. My mother, whose skin turned orange before she died, though the week before she got sick, she planted a huge garden. We were sure she was too powerful to die. Ma, even now, 10 years and 20 years after the funeral procession led us to Calvary Cemetery and to the mausoleum drawer they filed you in. I wish I could drive over to your house and find you there. Your earthy humor, your warm arms that always were the place I call home. I have to say, I didn't know how lucky I was to have the parents I had. And recently I did some readings in Italy, and after the readings in Rome, I went to the town where my mother came from, and I met a first cousin I had never met before. That's the interesting thing about being a child of immigrants. There are all these people you've never met, and they're first cousins. We all look alike, however. But anyway, I had never met them. Anyway, this woman takes out a photograph, and she said, your father sent this photograph in 1945 as a remembrance. And it's got my father's handwriting on it. And it's a picture of my sister, my brother, and I. And I think my brother was about 2, and I was about 5, and my sister was about 8. And I emailed the picture to my brother, whatever that's called that you do when you send a picture. I don't really know. But I sent it to him. My brother said, we look like we come from Appalachia. And I said, ow. Yeah, we were poor, and the clothes are hand-me-down. Okay, but we were so lucky. Don't you remember how lucky we were? He was just horrified. Like, oh my God, we look so poor. We don't exactly look prosperous. And I just think, and I wrote a poem about it, who would have expected what they would have expected from us was nothing. That's why I get so upset by these people talking against immigrants and poor people. I get so upset Because how do you know what if somebody had looked at me as a kid, and I had the best dress because the lady down the street had two sons who were quite successful, but she didn't want to move out of this poor neighborhood. And so she had a late-in-life daughter, and the kid had expensive clothes. She had red hair, so I looked horrible in any clothes that belonged to her, but they were obviously expensive clothes. My poor sister had this raggedy-looking dress on. It must have been a hand-me-down from somebody else, somebody poor, and so it was sort of threadbare. And I thought, yeah, okay. But who would have expected my brother would end up being a doctor? Who would expect my sister would end up being a nurse, and his nurse for 25 years, who even went to work in a wheelchair when she couldn't walk anymore. She just kept going. And so, well, anyway, I don't mean to blab. Okay, I'm going to read a poem. My husband died in 2006. And when he died, it was the same year as the 2005, excuse me, the same year as the BP oil spill. I think I'm getting the date of my husband's death confused. 2010, I forgot what year we're in. I keep thinking it's still 2006. It isn't, Maria, it's 2016. Anyway, I couldn't write about his death. We were married 47 years. I couldn't really write about his death without talking about my grief over what we've done to the world. We've really managed to. How could we take a world that was so pristine and wreck it like this? What carelessness, what greed we've had. Anyway, to write about my grief about him, I had to write about my grief about the oil spill and everything that is going on with the environment. Watching the pelican die. On TV, I watched the pelican with its mouth wide open, its wings and body coated with oil. I don't know if it was caught in that mouth-stretched towel when it died, or if it was howling in recognition that it cannot survive the coat of oil that bears it down. The ladies who take care of you when I'm gone tell me you are having trouble. His hands, they say, his hands. When I come home, I see your hands have turned black at the tips and the ends of your fingers have been eaten away. I watch the dead bird in the Gulf floating on top of the water, its legs stiff and straight in the air, its body drained of all motion, all light. In late afternoon, I hear my daughter cry out. I rush to see what's happened, and you are stretched out on the bed, your body so thin you look like a boy. You do not move. I call 911. The ambulance takes you to the hospital. BP is trying to put a cap on the spewing oil rig. The CEO keeps saying it's no problem. Clumps of oil wash ashore and float on the surface of the water. The beach is littered with dead fish and birds. At the hospital, they want to know whether we want extraordinary measures. No, I say, he has a living will. We hover around while they admit you have forgotten how to speak. I reach out to hold your hand, stroke your forehead. Dennis, I call out. You do not hear. The neurologist comes in, says, well, he should have been dead 5 years ago. What did you expect? You shouldn't have taken such good care of him. We did everything we could, the BP president says, looking directly at the camera. You always know somebody's lying when they look directly at the camera. We don't need to stop deep water drilling. Our economy will collapse if we do. The social worker comes into the room. You should put him in a nursing home, she tells me. My brother says, you kept him home all this time. If he gets a little stronger, I'll let him go home, and he'll be around the things he knows. Another doctor comes in and says, he's not going to make it. The social worker admonishes us with her bag of common sense. She does not love you. We take you home. I sit next to you and hold your hand. The reporter stands on a beach in a hurricane and picks up a huge glob of oil with a stick. Look, she says, look, and drips the oil on the white sand. She is shaking with fury at such destruction. Dead birds float by behind her. I feed you a jar of baby applesauce. You open your mouth and accept the food. When I see the pelican on TV with its mouth wide open in horror, I remember you as you lay dying. on the Gulf, the earth, and the sea are being destroyed just as you were by this disease that finally defeated you after you struggled against it for all those years. Some things are bigger than all of us. We cannot defeat them. If there is enough carelessness and greed in the world, even the ocean can be destroyed. And you who fought against this illness with such courage, even you cannot survive the blackened tips of your fingers, the oil heavy on the bird's feathers, the birds dead and floating on the surface that gradually sink and disappear. I'm going to read some poems from my new book. It has a painting. I know I have a lot of nerve. It has a painting of mine on the cover. And I actually have a book with a whole bunch of paintings of mine. And I never thought I would do that. And this publisher chased me around and said, I like your paintings. I want to do a book of your paintings and your poems. And I thought he was out of his mind. But I've gotten great pleasure out of the paintings and great pleasure out of seeing people's response to them. All my people are a little off because I can't really draw. I can't make a straight line, all the things that people who are artists can do. But I have an artist inside me. And just like we all have a kind of muse or creative part of ourselves, you have to let all those parts out. And I have to thank Diane DePrima for that because she talked me into going back to painting. We got our first TV when I was 11. I was fascinated by Father Knows Best, his big white house, his huge living room and dining room, his elegant stairs, his wife in her heels and dresses and frilly aprons. Nothing like the homemade apron my mother wore, the one she sewed from flour sacks with a rough cloth and tiny flowers. Before TV, I had the Dick and Jane books to teach me about that other America with its big houses and lawns, its pipe-smoking father raking leaves in his cardigan and brown dress pants. I love those characters, the world they painted so different from my own. But it wasn't until the TV program that I understood that my America with its cold water flat, its small rooms, the life of making do, its Italian chatter, was so different from the upper-class American life, from that upper-class American life, and that my America was there in my accent, in the expressions I used, in everything I didn't know about life in those white colonials in towns like Summit or Ridgewood. In the half hour of the show, I pretend their world was mine, but some practical part of me knew the distance was too great, and the comfort of my mother's house, in the food I loved, in the music of Italian, I was where I belonged. Years later, I dated a young man whose parents lived in Scarsdale, and when he took me to their house for dinner, they were horrified by me. By then, I had graduated from grad school and was teaching at a college, yet they knew I wasn't one of them. Their maid poured my coffee and handed me a silver bowl with tongs to pick up the sugar cubes, and I kept dropping them. They all stared while I struggled. His parents thought I was after his money, and later I learned they hired a private investigator to look into my family. Even so, I was invited to a cocktail party at his house, and his sister, who graduated from Smith, had invited all her friends. They all wore black cocktail dresses and black heels. I wore a gray suit. His sister came up to me in the middle of the party and hissed, "You don't belong here. Can't you see that? Leave my brother alone." For the rest of the evening, I barely held on, my lips trembling, a fake smile on my face. I told him I could not see him anymore, but I was too humiliated to say why. All the TV programs in the world could not have prepared me for the invisible walls that protected those people from people like me. I'm going to read a poem about my daughter, okay? I love my daughter, I have to say. I love my son too, but he doesn't love me so much, but what can you do? He'll come back to me later. The day I lost my daughter in Macy's, I've forgotten until now, but the time I lost my 4-year-old daughter in Macy's shoe department. I always hated shopping, but I was looking at a pair of boots, trying to figure out whether they'd be comfortable, when I realized she was gone. I ran through the racks of shoes, calling her name, then circled wider, past suits and sweaters. Finally, I saw her and scooped her up, untangling her from a glittery shawl. All these years later, I wonder if she remembers being lost, my voice sharp with fear, rising higher and higher as I called her name. My practical, lovely, down-to-earth daughter. My daughter who always seems to know the right thing to do, who sees all too clearly her dippy mother, turning away from her, letting go of her hand. I can almost see her rolling her eyes, her mother too easily lost in a dream world or in a poem. Her mother, who almost by accident raised this perfect daughter, this treasure, this girl who fills the room with light. Am I not lucky to have somebody that I can feel that way about? I really do think I'm extremely lucky. I'm going to read, we had wait, I have to look at the time too, just a second while I take a peek here. Okay. I'm going to read a poem called Trading in the VW Bus. That tells you just about how old I am. When we moved back to New Jersey Woodhouse without seeing it on Oaks Place in Hawthorne, across from my sister's house, we drove to New Jersey in our VW bus, and soon after we settled in, my sister said, "Listen, you have to get rid of that bus. The neighbors are talking. They think you're hippies, and this is not that kind of neighborhood." So we gave in and sold the VW camper and instead bought a Ford Pinto station wagon, dark green and sedate, unimaginative as mud. I love the VW bus, the camping trips we took in it to Colorado and New Mexico and Arizona, the table that turned into a bed, the built-in booths that held sheets and blankets and pillows, the board we placed across the front seats so John, who was only 4, could sleep on it, and the crib we put in the back for Jennifer. Letting the VW bus go was an admission we were no longer as young as we had been, that we'd have to move into adulthood in a way we had not before. A life of suburban homeowners, just like that boring green Pinto, that car that almost shouted, "We're careful, frugal adults," though we had just turned 30. And we would have liked to pretend we were flowered children forever. Isn't it awful the way life gets away from us, you know? It does kind of get away from us. Let's see. I gotta make sure about that. Just a second. I gotta get rid of some of these poems. I'm gonna read a poem about my daughter. My daughter is a professor at Bentley University in Waltham, Massachusetts, and she's very, very, very driven. I don't know where she could have gotten that from. I just can't understand. But she's hard for her to let go. Anyway, she was working on a book. It's my Gillan Pot Roast. My daughter is working on her book, which was due at the publisher weeks ago. She has not slept in days. She tells me, "I am a Gillan. Remember Grandma, how she'd start getting ready to cook a pot roast at 8 a.m. and by 5 p.m. she still wouldn't be finished. That's what I'm like with this book. It's my Gillan Pot Roast." We both laugh, but I hear the desperation in her voice. I dig out my mother's rosary, begging God to send her the energy and inspiration to find her way to the end of this book. I haven't been to church in years. I don't know why God would listen to my prayers, but for my daughter, I am willing to try anything. I promised all sorts of things if only God will help her get the book finished so she can move on with her life. Every day I call her. Every day she's not finished. I tell her I am praying. I can tell she's encouraged. When more days go by, she tells me, "Forget it. I don't need a prayer. I need a miracle." I want to say, it's a scholarly book. 3 people will read it. Why are you worrying? Just forget it. And she says, You would have finished it months ago. You're a Mazziotti. This is my pot roast. I have to cook it the Gillan way. Some of these conversations end up really, really being funny. I'm going to read a poem. I took my grandson with me. This is something I would have, if I had had a grandmother I actually knew, which I didn't, because what happens with immigrants, unless they have money, they really can't go back and forth to the country of origin. And, this was not a time when people had that kind of money. So my parents left Italy when they were young. And they went back after my brother graduated from medical school. But by then, all the parents were dead. And I never got to meet them. To me, they were blue airmail letters. So I wanted to take my grandson to Italy, which I love. And I wanted him to see the town on the top of a mountain where my parents came from, and to see Rome, and to see Sicily. I just wanted to give him this. And you know how we lie to ourselves a lot? Anyway, this is called Italian Summer. This summer in Italy, you helped me up steps, let me hold your arm as we walked the cobblestone streets of Italian hill towns. I wanted to give you a gift of the Italy I love, grandson. How easy it is to believe what we want to believe about the way people see us, what they feel. For years, I held on to the image of you at 7 years old in your North Carolina house. You walked past me in your family room, backed up, looked at me with your huge violet eyes. I love you, Grandma, you said. Or the way you always grabbed your pillow and overnight bag because you wanted to stay with me at the hotel when I visited you. So much sweetness always coming off you. Such an open, loving heart. Now you're 19, and we are in Italy together. We have been here almost 3 weeks. I am happy to work with you, to watch you try new foods. At my favorite restaurant in Rome, we have dinner together, and you drink your glass of champagne and mine. Suddenly you turn to me and tell me everything your mother and father say about me. All the things that are wrong, too busy, too loud, too enthusiastic, all the things I should have done. And in the restaurant where I'll never be able to go again, I start to cry. We leave the restaurant and you take my arms, but my throat clams closed. I can't speak. How foolish I feel for believing you love me as I have always loved you. Now, each night, I pray for you to do well in your classes, to be happy, to make friends. I love you no less, that whenever I think of you, I am sad for this loss, a cave that opens inside me, too deep and dark ever to fill. Okay, and I guess I'll finish. I'm going to finish with a poem. I don't know if you know what Biancheria is. I think I really do need to finish. Okay, this is my last poem. The lace tablecloth and the patterns of memory. My mother came from Italy, and she brought with her a trunk full of linens she'd embroidered or appliqued. Later, she had crocheted and appliqued lace she had crocheted into tablecloths and dresser scarves. My mother packed them in a large metal trunk, and each year she added sheets she bought with pennies saved from her 25 cents an hour job in the factories of Patterson. I used the table and cloth and linens all the years of our marriage when we had company or on holidays. And after we'd eaten together in my dining room, my mother would take them home to wash and iron and bring them back white and starched and pristine. My mother died 22 years ago. My husband in 2010. But today I opened the drawer where I keep the lace tablecloths and linens and see my mother, my husband, and me as a young couple. My husband, handsome, with his high cheekbones and gray eyes. My mother, father, and sisters, still alive and vibrant. Our children and our nieces and nephews, all there. I see in the lace pattern the pattern of our lives, the way it winds in and out, connecting all who came before, love and marriage and grief woven to the threads. And know that all the people I have loved are tucked away carefully in my mind so that I can lift them out and remember and be comforted. Would somebody like to ask questions? If you'd like to, otherwise I'll go sit down. But if you have a question, I'll be glad to answer it, yeah.
Is William Carlos, I hear a lot of, is William Carlos Williams an influence on you?
In a roundabout way. William Carlos Williams had a big influence on Allen Ginsberg. And though Allen Ginsberg's subject matter and mine are very far removed, he was the one who told Ginsberg to stop writing those poems they were teaching him at Columbia about waterfowl. He said to him, what do you know about waterfowl? But, why are you writing about that? Why aren't you writing about Patterson and where you grew up and your father and being gay and all the rest? Why aren't you writing about that? And Ginsberg went home and he wrote Kaddish, which was a prayer for the dead for his mother. And it's such a specific poem. It's such an amazing poem because the details he uses about his mother, it couldn't be anybody else's mother, because he finds the details that really tell us what it was like to have her as a mother. And believe me, she wasn't a candy bar box mother, because she was insane. So he would come home and she would be nuts. And then another day he'd come home and she would be okay. So he had a difficult upbringing in terms of his mother, whom he loved very much. And his father couldn't deal with it, so his father would send him to the insane asylum to take his mother back to the insane asylum when she went off the rails. So that's part of what's in Kaddish, that bus ride for this 17-year-old kid taking his mother to the insane asylum. So once you read that, you can never forget it. I am really in the Whitman-esque and Ginsberg tradition, encouraged by Williams, but Williams doesn't write like that himself. The interesting thing about Williams is he was very much a modernist and was very good friends with all the modernists, T.S. Eliot. He was really very much in that tradition, and then also in the Imagist tradition. But what he was able to do was to see in Ginsberg that his poems were going off track. He said to him, your letters are much more interesting than your poems. And believe me, I heard those poems. He came and read those sonnets that he was writing at Columbia. Boring, really boring. And you can't imagine Ginsberg being boring, but he was. And and Williams put into Patterson Ginsberg's letters. He didn't put his poems because he hadn't written those poems yet. Ginsberg hadn't written them, but under his tutelage. So I feel very connected to Williams. I feel there's a tradition in Patterson and in New Jersey. Whitman, with the long lines and the celebration of the self and the willingness to say anything and to really both lament the dead and celebrate them and celebrate the self. And then Ginsberg with his long lines and rolling rhythms like the Old Testament. Both of them really influenced by the Old Testament. But I love the fact that Williams, even though he really was friends with all the modernists, didn't try to turn them into modernists. He found what was good about their work and opened the door for them. And there was a lot of people, because I've run a poetry center for 37 years, and I probably had just about every major poet in the country read for me. And you'd be surprised how many of the poets older poets, wrote to Williams. He had a correspondence with them. He helped them with their poems. He told Galway Canal, what the hell are you writing about a bear? You tell me what you know about a bear. You know anything about a bear. Why are you writing that? And he wasn't afraid to say, you're not going in the right direction. Still, he was friends with Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot and all those people who were writing things that were very intellectual, and also all the people who were writing the Imagist poetry. So for me, because I grew up in Patterson and because I fell in love with English, I love Italian because that was my first language, but I fell in love with the way English sounded in poems, and these teachers would read us poems by people like Longfellow and Keats and Shelley, and I just loved the way Yeats. I loved hearing the sound, the music in the language. And I tried for a long time to write imagistic poems. I wrote a lot of imagistic poems, a lot of poems based in the English literary tradition. And then when I went back to graduate school, when my children were starting to grow up, and I got my master's early, when I was young, and then I went back to graduate school later. And a graduate school professor said, it's in this poem about your father that you find the story you have to tell. And he gave me courage. And I try to give my students that courage. Find the story you have to tell and tell it true. Don't tell it slant. Hell with Emily Dickinson. Tell it true. Because there's a lot of people trying to put a plug in your mouth, especially women. You know, don't write anything personal. Don't write, oh, who needs another poem about a grandfather? Well, I do. Personally, I want to find out about all your grandfathers, all your grandmothers, all your mothers and fathers. I love hearing stories, people's stories. For me, that really is a connection for me, a human connection for me, hearing other people's stories. So I hope you'll never listen to somebody who says, you can't write about your mother. Why not? I'm going to write about my mother if I want to write about my mother. He gave me the courage to say I don't have to be Keats or Shelley or Longfellow or Yeats or Dylan Thomas, although I love Dylan Thomas, and I still recite Dylan Thomas because it's such music, it's so incredible. But I don't have to be Dylan Thomas. I can be Maria Mazziotti Gillan from 17th Street and 19th Street in Paterson, New Jersey, a daughter, a granddaughter, a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a teacher, all the things that I am, rooted in a place that's urban and a little gritty and that I love. And I notice in my life that I keep going back to those places where I grew up. And I'll tell you one story, and then I'm going to stop. But reporters came to interview me. And when they came to interview me, they were one had graduated from Yale, and the other had graduated from Harvard. And they wanted to take me to the house where I grew up. And they're looking around, and I could see their absolute horror. They're like, but this is a dump. This one grew up here. I could just see it in their faces. They just didn't understand how incredible it was. I mean, we could go outside. Maybe it was polluted, but we didn't know it. And my mother would scoop some fresh snow into a cup, and she'd put powdered sugar on it, and she'd put coffee, espresso on it, and that was our ice cream. And it was so amazingly wonderful. Now, you wouldn't dare do that now. Who knows what's coming down from the sky on our heads? But then they did that. And I feel like that whole time when I was growing up, I just was unaware how lucky I was to have, first of all, in having a lot of students who don't have parents who love them. I see how tremendously important it is to have parents who love you, who want you to succeed, even if they think you're nuts. When I said I wanted to be a poet, I mean, my parents were factory workers. Poet, are you crazy? How are you going to earn a living? You're going to starve to death. My mother thought the best thing in the world that you could do was to become a kindergarten teacher so you would be home after school when the kids came home from school. And then you'd have all summer off. And that was my idea. That was as high up as my mother dared to dream. So there I am saying I want to be a poet. But she did save money for a year to buy me a typewriter so I could be the poet I said I wanted to be. So when my brother said we looked like we could be from Appalachia, I said, don't you remember how lucky we were? And my mother could cook like a dream, too, to top it off. So, any other questions? Anybody? Well, thank you. You're a lovely audience. What?
Hey, could I make a request based on all that great energy?
Right, sure.
And in your new book, you have a poem called I Come From.
Oh, okay.
Could you end with that for us?
I'd love to. And I'm glad you remember it. I don't remember what page it's on, though. Oh, 89, you're right. Knows what page, isn't he sweet? Okay, wait a minute. When you have a new book, you never can find anything. That's the thing. I come from the Riverside section of Paterson, New Jersey, with its 2- and 3-family houses built close together, separated by raggedy alleys that led to the back doors where everyone, even company, entered. I come from old ladies sitting on stoops in their black mourning dresses. I don't mean mourning, M-O-R-N, mourning, M-O-U-R-N. They had to wear black for a year after somebody in Italy died. I come from old ladies sitting on stoops in their black mourning dresses, ladies who use big white handkerchiefs to wipe the sweat from their brows and to fan themselves in the humid August air. I come from raised voices and laughter drifting out of tenement windows, the houses leaning into each other, the old windows loose and rattling. I come from a place where we knew everything about our neighbors, but no one ever said anything, at least not to their faces. But word spread about the family arguments, the man who drank, the married woman who invited a man into our house in the afternoon. I come from a place where we sat around the kitchen table and talked and ate and played Monopoly or dominoes. The kitchen was where we did everything, surrounded always by the aroma of baking bread or sugar cookies and boiling soup. I come from a place with so much love. Even today, I am grateful, though I didn't understand all that I had until it was gone. Thank you.